Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to another awesome Business Analytics virtual chapter meeting. I want to let you know that all sessions are recorded and slides are also added to the Pass BA VC website. For the fastest way to get recordings, please check under Twitter handle Pass BA VC. Also like to let you know that on 10.3 we have another session on predictive analytics, which looks exciting. And also on 10.24, Andrew Rust is going to speak on business analytics in general. Also, if you want more of this great content, you can either attend the PASS Summit, which is in October 15th to 18th in Charlotte. And also, there's going to be another Business Analytics conference in May of next year. So information is just coming out on that. I believe registration is open, and the call for speakers goes out very shortly. For this session, I'd like to hold all questions to the end. I'd also like to thank you very much for taking the poll. Of the folks polled, only 20% have actually created a solution in Power Map. So this is really great for the other 80% to get a good demo on this. And without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Devin Knight of Pragmaticworks, who's going to talk about touring your data with Power Map.
All right, thank you, Melissa, and thank you guys for joining me today. It's been about a month, I guess. I presented last. We did a Power Query demonstration, and now back here to do one on Power Map to kind of give you some more exposure into Power BI and the individual components within Power BI. So again, my name's Devin Knight. I work for Pragmaticworks. I actually run the training department for Pragmaticworks. You see my contact information. You hopefully are seeing my slide right now, and also my Twitter handle if you do Twitter. Just briefly about myself. I don't, talk a whole heck of a lot about myself during the presentations here, but just to give you a little bit of information about me. Like I said, I am the training director here at Pragmaticworks. This is a fun little slide here. I also have authored a couple SQL Server books. I'm actually about to start working on my sixth SQL Server book here to kind of coincide with the 2014 release coming up. I also run the SQL Server user group meeting in Jacksonville. So I live in Jacksonville, Florida, and I run the group down here. And then finally, I blog at a website called BIDN.com. It's Business Intelligence Development Network. And I blog quite a bit about Power BI as well as traditional BI as well. Okay. So what our plan for today is we're going to go over kind of a little bit of an overview of Power Map, talk about why you would use Power Map, what are some situations when you would use it. We'll actually look at some demonstrations on how to do it, as well as going through the process of linking geographical fields to Power Map, which is done pretty easily. Then we'll go through the process of actually creating a tour. And a tour is kind of like a movie. You can kind of picture yourself as a director, and you're creating a movie of your data, where you're actually able to kind of go across your data in a map and create a movie out of it. Now, luckily, there's actually been a recent release, a recent update to Power Map. Actually, Power Map and Power Query got an update both within the last 2 or 3 weeks. Now, this session is going to focus in on Power Map, but I will, when we get into Excel, show you a couple things in Power Query just to show you the new additions that they've added in Power Query, so you're aware of them, because I did do that Power Query session about a month ago. But again, I'll focus more on Power Map. And if you've downloaded Power Map in the past, I will actually show and highlight some of the new features that they've added in the latest release. Okay? All right, so here's the big why. Why use Power Map? And I actually stole this slide from one of my buddies, Jason Thomas. He had a great slide, and I thought it really answered the question on why use Power Map or why use any kind of geographical presentation layer tool. And it should be a pretty clear and direct answer is I want to be able to visualize geographical data. So which one here represents your data best? The one on the left-hand side or the one on the right-hand side? Clearly on the right-hand side, I can see my data very clearly. I can see where my data lands, and I can get down to a very specific point inside of a geographical tool like Power Map. Now there are several ways that you can, and Jason, I bring Jason up because he actually has done quite a few presentations on mapping geographical data with Microsoft tools. He'll actually tell you there's a lot of different tools that you can use beyond PowerMap. Obviously you have PowerView, can do mapping technology or has mapping technologies built into it. Traditional reporting services has mapping technologies inside of it. And then, like we're focusing on today, PowerMap does as well. So it's a real obvious answer here is why would you use it? Because it tells a better story. It really does help you navigate the data and be able to visualize the data better if you can see it on a map. All right, so a little bit about PowerMap in case this is your first time seeing it. It is a 3D visualization tool, 3D mapping visualization tool, as you can see in my screenshot here. And it is an add-in for Excel 2013. So it is an only 2013 tool. So if you have 2010, unfortunately, the add-in does not work for 2010, unlike some of the new other Power BI add-ins like Power Query. Power Query will actually work in Excel 2010 or 2013. But for PowerMap, it's a 2013 only tool. And like I said, it is a free download that you can go download and add into your Excel environment. And basically, it's going to take geographical data and plot it to a map, as you can see in my screenshot here. And it allows you to analyze that data on a 3D globe using Bing. So it's actually using Bing Maps, so that tells you, first of all, you do need to have an internet connection whenever you're building out a Power Map solution. And it does create 3D visualizations that you can share with others. Now, the sharing story is going to get better as it goes on. Keep in mind, I definitely want to highlight this and mention this fact that PowerMap is actually not officially out of preview mode yet. It's all still kind of considered beta. There's no official release of it yet. So keep that in mind as you're looking at this, because some of the stories as far as how you share your tours that you create are being enhanced. In fact, they've actually enhanced that just within the last release. So you will get some more benefits as they continue to move forward with the tool, and as it actually comes to its final release, you'll find quite a few extra things get added. Like I mentioned, the latest release actually enhanced the sharing story quite a bit. So if I create a tour, if I create some kind of mapping solution, how do I share it with other people? Well, with the latest release, they've actually made it so you can create an MP4 file. You can actually create movie files out of a tour that you can create, And I'll walk you through that here in a few moments. Okay. Now a little bit about actually getting the data in here, so linking geographical fields to PowerMap. If you have any of the following geographical fields you see on the left-hand side, those can be connected to PowerMap properties. And the ability to do this has actually been made very easy in the latest release. Not that it was terribly difficult in the previous release, but they've actually made it, the getting started process has been made much easier. So if you have any of the following geographical types that you see here, then they can be mapped or placed onto a PowerMap solution. Okay, so once you plot out your geographical fields, your next step is to go through and apply data to it, apply aggregated data. For example, I want to be able to aggregate up my sales and see where my sales are plotted out on my map to see where my best customers live. And you also want to be able to see this across time. And to be able to see this across time, PowerMap gives you the ability to actually animate your data across time. So if you have a date field, for example, you can place that date field into a time property, which allows you to actually animate the map. And that kind of gives you the movie look and feel, where I can actually make it so that I can see from the early 1900s to the 2000s how my election data looked. And in fact, we're actually going to look at some election data today in our examples. So it allows you to bring time, or really bring life to your maps by adding time data to it. Now the time settings are as listed here. You can either show instant points. What that basically means is at that very instance, or that very point in time, I'm going to flash a point on my map. That's what instant means. Time accumulation kind of means it's going to aggregate it up and grow and make it, for example, if you do a bubble chart on a map, it's going to grow that bubble more and more and more over time. That's opposed to the instant one where it's just going to flash a bubble once and then go away. And then persist last is just always going to show the last dot. If you're visualizing this as a bubble chart, it's going to always show what the last point was. Okay, so keep that in mind as we go through actually looking at the tool. There's also some easy-to-use playback controls, so I can tell it like a range of dates that I would like to use. For example, if I don't have data between 1900 and 1950 in a certain area of the country, I can actually eliminate that during the tour that we create. And I can just visualize data within the time frame that I care about. Okay, and we'll cover how to do this as well. All right, so the whole point of all this, the whole point of mapping geographical types and mapping time data, or putting time to a map, is so that you can eventually create what's called a tour. And a tour basically is like making yourself a director. You're a director of your data. You get to create a solution that visualizes your data into what appears to be like a movie. And you actually can place different scenes, what they call scenes, and a tour is basically a collection of scenes. So think of a scene like a movie scene, right? Create a scene where we're going to look at San Francisco, California, and I want to see how my sales grew in San Francisco, California from 1950 to 2000, and I'll create that as a scene. I may also want to see how my data grew from 1970 to 2000 in Chicago. And these would each be kind of multiple scenes that I can pull together into a tour. And the tour basically highlights different elements of your data that you want to show your users. So your ultimate goal here is you're trying to highlight things that are important to your users whenever they look at this geographical data. And that's what the tour is going to do for you. Okay, so scene, you create multiple scenes, and multiple scenes make up a tour. Now there are several new things. I mentioned there was a new release of Power Map just within the last 2 weeks. I think it came out last Monday, if I remember right. Last Monday there was a new release of Power Map. And in that new release, there was some fixes, and there was also some enhancements. One of the major fixes, if you played with Power Map early on, you may have found that if you built a Power Map solution on top of a Power Pivot workbook, if you had hidden fields inside that Power Pivot workbook, or if you had calculated fields inside that Power Pivot workbook, it would immediately throw an error inside Power Map. In fact, for myself, when I tried to demonstrate this, it would actually crash, and it would crash Excel. Well, luckily that issue's been fixed. There's no issue there anymore. You can have a Power Pivot workbook with hidden columns or calculated columns, and it brings it into Power Map without issue. There's also been some enhancements. So on top of the fix there, I believe there's some other fixes as well, but that's the biggest one that most people noticed. If you want to list anything else under fixes, there's just been some more general enhancements with the performance. So a lot of people are seeing much better performance out of it now. But as far as enhancements, you're going to see that there are some things like a better getting started experience. I mentioned this earlier. And this is basically in regards to mapping your geographical types. So it'll actually help you and guide you in mapping out your geographical types. For example, if I have my data down to a zip code level, it makes it much easier to map that out now. And I'll show you that experience here in a few moments. You also have the ability to customize color layers. And what I mean by that is you'll notice here, for example, in my map that I have, this map that you see here in the bottom right, this is from Power Map. I have the ability to actually customize these colors now. So the color that you see here, the color that you see mapped to all these geographical types or these regions, I have some flexibility in being able to customize those. And I actually will show you that when we get to it in a few moments. Okay, so again, keep in mind this is actually even pre-version 1 of this tool, so there's a lot of enhancements that are coming forward with it. The other big one there, as I just said it, was you can now map out regions or geopolitical boundaries. So for example, you see listed here, I have a map of the United States, and it does map out each of the states within our country. Now I know that inevitably the question will come about mapping non-U.S. states. I believe that is coming from what I've heard. It may not be in this version that we're looking at right now. So again, we're looking at pre-version 1 of this tool. So you will see things like geopolitical boundaries come outside of the United States coming forward. The other big enhancement I mentioned earlier, you can now export to a video. So I can actually take a video of my tour or export to a video, and then from there I'll be able to share it with others. So that was one of the big problems with Power Map in the previous beta, or the previous preview version, was it didn't really have a good story for how you would share it with others. Well, they've given you a solution here now, is you can actually export this to a video, share the video with others, whether it's through a web page, whether it's through, if it's acceptable data to share publicly, maybe you can share it through YouTube. You have some options there. Okay. All right, so this is the new enhancements. This is the new stuff that's been added just within the last 2 weeks. Now, what I'm going to show you guys today is a couple examples. I'm going to show you a lot of the new stuff, and I'll also show you some of the ways you can just get started. If this is your first time seeing Power Map, we'll kind of work our way through it as if we were doing this for the first time. Okay. All right, I'll bring this back up at the end, but this is my contact information again. Let's actually get started on a demonstration now. Now you guys should be seeing my Excel window right now, and what we're going to do is we're going to walk through several examples of me starting off with some data, and then I'm going to use that data to build out a solution. Now, if you followed along, I mentioned that I did a Power Query demonstration about a month ago for the same group, and Melissa has the recording of that. Unfortunately, the connection on that was a little, had some issues with the connection, so the recording may not be that great. But what I do want to point out for you, those of you that were along for the ride on that one, is that there's been some enhancements to Power Query as well. So just very briefly on the enhancements on that occurred within the last 2 weeks. A couple of the things that you will notice now that have been added is when you're merging multiple data sources together, you now have a new option here on the bottom to only merge matching rows. So again, this is a different topic, but I want to make sure I highlighted it because I had presented on this before. Basically, the problem that existed before with Power Query is that you could only basically do left outer joins. When you join two different data sets together or two different queries together, you can only do left joins. They've added in the ability to do inner joins now. And that's just with that little checkbox there. I tell it which query I want to join to here and which query I want to join to here. Check off that I want it to be an inner join, and then it merges them together. If I don't check it, it's a left outer join. The other thing that's been enhanced on Power Query that I'll just show you briefly is this new organization section. This organization section allows, and this is really kind of full scale into the Power BI solutions that you're going to see going forward, but this is going to allow you to take an organizational data set, share it through something like Office 365 and SharePoint, and then allow others to be able to query down from that data set. So if I create a data set, an organizational data set, a data set for my company, and I want others to be able to build on top of that data set, I can publish it off to SharePoint, and then others will then be able to use it and consume it. Whenever I publish this off to SharePoint, I'll also see, when I do online searches, this option here in the top left, that not only do I see Wikipedia data sources in there, but I'll also see organizational data sources. Okay? So that's just some new enhancements that they added with Power Query. I'm not going to dig too much more into Power Query. I just wanted to point those out to you. The rest of the session, though, is going to focus completely on Power Map. Now, I do have a data set here that we're looking at, and you can see there are some geographical fields in here. I see a listing of states, and actually the data set that we're looking at here, you can tell by the name of my workbook, is a listing of failed banks. These are banks that have failed within the last, I think, 8 or 9 years here. And what I'd like to do, and I want to walk you guys through, is creating a tour on this and kind of highlight the areas of the map, or we're going to create a map, and highlight the areas of the map that have excessive failed banks. Areas of our country that have had a ton of different failed banks have occurred in there. Okay? So here's what I'm going to do. I've already downloaded and installed the free add-in for Power Map. Once you download and install it, you still need to enable it for Excel. The way you do that is you go over to your File menu inside of Excel 2013. So keep in mind this is a 2013 only tool at this point. But I go underneath my File menu and go underneath Options, and then find the Add-in section here. Underneath the Add-in section, once I select that, underneath that Add-in section, you'll see on the very bottom, you can pick COM add-ins, and that's where all of your real new Power BI add-ins are listed under. So you'll select COM add-ins here and hit Go. This will open up the little COM add-ins window where you can check off which of the features you want to enable. And in my case, I need to make sure that I enable Power Map here. Okay, you'll notice it says Preview next to it. That tells you this is not a full release, but this is the latest release that I'm working with right here. All right, so I'm going to select Power Map to turn on the feature and hit OK. All right, once I've turned on the feature, you'll notice there's no new tab that appears. There's nothing new as far as tabs go, but there is a new button that appears under the Insert menu. So I'm going to go underneath my Insert menu here, and you'll find underneath the Insert menu, I have a new button here called Map, or Power Map. And this is where we're going to have the ability to create those 3D map visualizations using Power Map. Okay? So I already have my data set here. I can see my data set for my failed banks is already listed here. If I want to launch Power Map and create a visualization on top of it, I would simply select Power Map, tell it I want to launch PowerMap. And we would see a listing here of any tours that we've already created. You can see I've already created one tour on this data previously, but I'm going to create a brand new one from scratch with you guys. Okay, so I'll create a new tour here. All right, so what happens with PowerMap is it actually opens just like Power Pivot does. If you've experienced Power Pivot before, it opens in its own separate window. So you'll notice I still have my Excel workbook open in the background, but this separate window opens up for PowerMap. And that's the same kind of look and feel that you've probably experienced if you've done Power Pivot before. Power Pivot opens in a Power Pivot window. PowerMap opens in a PowerMap window. Okay, so this, what it does is it starts us off with a just empty 3D map here. And you can see my 3D globe is brought in from Bing. So it's a Bing map that we're looking at. Now a couple things I'll highlight up top here, and I'll kind of work our way across, and I'll cover a couple of these other ones as we do our demonstrations. But I want to talk about the ribbon here at the very top for a few moments. And there's a few enhancements that I'll mention here that have been added in the latest release. You'll notice the first couple options here have to do with the tours. This is our tour section. Inside the tour section we can add scenes. Remember I talked about scenes. These are kind of like scenes of a movie that you create. And the tour is the completed movie. So you can either play your movie or add scenes to your movie. You could also create a video out of the movie that you create. So the way this works is as you create scenes inside PowerMap, they live inside PowerMap. If you want to share it with others, then you tell it that you want to create a video out of your tour. You could also, of course, take screenshots of this by using the little screen capture tool they have here. Now you have multiple themes that you can apply to your map. So there's some new functionality here as well. For example, this flat map option is brand new that was added in the latest release. And I just kind of like pushing it because it makes a nice little neat effect here whenever we're looking at our map. And it takes our 3D map and turns it into a flat map. So if you prefer to have the option of having a flat map versus a 3D map, they've now added that functionality in here as well. You also have different types of themes. If you want to visualize your map differently, you'll see there's different types of themes, more of a satellite view versus a street view. And there's multiple different variations of that. There's more of a grayscale view of a map here. There's several different themes that are available to you. So you can choose what, that's a pretty awful looking theme there, but you can choose whatever theme you'd like. Okay? I'm going to stick with the default one. It's a little easier to read. All right. You'll also notice here that you can also add map labels. So if you want to see city labels added on, or even country labels, you can add in map labels, and it will label off each of your countries. And as you start to zoom in even closer, you'll see states, and zoom in even closer, you'll see cities as well. Okay. Now I'm just using my scroll bar here to do this, but the nice thing about PowerMap is it is very sensitive to touch. I have a touch monitor right now I'm actually using to zoom in and zoom out. Because PowerMap does give you the ability to play around with it on a touchscreen. Okay. The other thing I'll highlight here underneath the map section is the find location. This is a neat little functionality where I can actually hit find location, type in a city or even an address. So if I wanted to type in where I'm from, Jacksonville, Florida, I can type that in to the little find location, and it'll take me straight to that point that I'm looking for. Okay. And I can always zoom out if I didn't really want to go there. All right, so let's go through, I'll talk about these other ones as we continue to discuss, but let's actually go through the process of building out a small little solution using PowerMap. Now the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to look for my geographical types. And this is what I mentioned earlier that was new, was they enhanced the getting started experience. They've made it a little easier, a little smoother to get started, because you'll notice here that it's immediately asking me for my geographical field. So what is my field that maps out my data points? Okay, and as I actually look at my data here, I'll notice that I have cities listed, and I can select city. I can even go down to state level if I wanted to, but I'm going to go ahead and select city. And when I select city, you'll notice it starts to map out all my points for my cities. And you'll also notice, this is part of that getting started experience enhanced that I mentioned. You'll also notice at the very bottom here that it's mapped my city column right here. This is my city column. I'm sorry, on the left-hand side is my city column. And on the right-hand side, this is the property inside PowerMap. So this kind of lists out the properties that I could map to inside PowerMap. Okay? So this is a city column. I'm mapping to the city property in PowerMap. And that way it knows what granularity we're looking at when we're doing our mapping solution. All right, so I've mapped my city column to the city property, and I'll simply hit Next. And now what it's done is it's located and actually sets up top here. You'll notice right here that we are mapping by city. Okay, so that geographical property has now been set. Okay, you can always go back and change it. If you come over here, you can hit Edit, and you can change those properties if you want. Okay. Now again, you can zoom in and zoom out. I can zoom down all the way down to the city level. I can go even further down, really extremely close if I wanted to get all the way down to street level if I wanted to as well. There's no street view or anything like that like you have with some mapping websites. All right, so I've mapped out the data points. These are all the cities that I have inside of my data set. Now what I'd like to do is be able to analyze this in some way, for example, by the number of banks that have failed. Okay, so I'm trying to locate, that was my whole goal here, is I'm trying to locate the highest number of failed banks on a map. So I can do that pretty easily. I can select something like the bank name here, and I can take that bank name and I'm going to tell it that rather than making it a category down here in the bottom, and you can see you can do multiple types of charts with this, but rather than it being a category, I'd actually like this to be a representation of the height of my little dots that I have here. Okay, so you'll notice what it's doing here is it's taking a count of my bank names, so a count of how many failed banks that I've had here essentially. And as I look around my map, you'll see it's giving me a legend, and you can close out the legend if you don't want to view that. But I can see very clearly that there's a particularly high spike here, but it looks like it's probably in Chicago. So Chicago looks like it's probably one of my cities that had the most failed banks, just visualizing it here, spot checking. Looks like Atlanta was probably another one of them here as well. Let's see if we have any West Coast ones. We got a couple West Coast ones. It looks like Los Angeles had quite a few, and so did Phoenix. So these are probably some of the cities I would want to highlight when I create my tour. All right, so let's walk through the process of doing that. Now, when we create tours, you usually want to apply it to some kind of time analysis. So that way I can see across time, when did these failed banks start to occur? And the way I can do that is pretty easily. I can come over here where we see that we have our closing date. So this is the date that my bank actually closed. I can select that closing date, and you'll notice that inside my little window here in the bottom right, that it applied that closing date to the time property, which means we can now animate across time. That's what you see has appeared over here. You can now animate across time how your data laid on the map. Okay, so you'll notice there's this new little play axis here that shows up, and I can actually hit this play button and see all these failed banks start to pop up, all the way from 2005 to now, and especially there, the 2008-2009 time frame, they really shot up into an extreme. Okay, so this is a quick way of visualizing it. Now, if I don't like these little blue dots, you do have some flexibility with changing the bar colors. This is a new enhancement that they've given you as well. If I want to change the color or the visualization of those bars, I can go over to this little settings button here in the top right and tell it rather than showing the failed banks as blue, I want to show the failed banks as red because obviously failed banks are bad and I want it to look bad on my chart or on my map. All right, so I'm having all these things show up in red. Now what I'd like to do is actually create our first tour together. Okay? So here's how I'll do this. I'm going to start by creating a scene, and we've actually already have our first scene. What you see on the far left here, this whole little window on the far left is your scene editor. You have all of your scenes that you've created will be listed here, one right after another on top of each other, or really below each other, inside this far left window over here. Okay, so our first scene has already been created. You also see that your tour is here as well. So it says enter a tour name. If we want to name this tour, I'll call this my failed banks tour, something like that. You can also name each individual scene. So I'm looking at an individual scene right now. This is a scene that shows the entire country. If I want to name this scene, I can hit this little settings button that you see right here on top of the scene, and it'll allow me to name that scene. When I hit that little settings button, you'll notice on the far right that we're looking at the scene options now, where I can now name this scene, and I'll call this my full U.S. map. Now you have some flexibility here as well. There's some neat things that you can do with inside the scenes options. You have the ability to do things like change the effect. So whenever I'm playing my tour, how do I want to look at the data? It allows you to do things like flyovers. You can fly over your data. You can do a figure 8 over your data. This is just how it kind of, I think about ice skating and a figure 8 with ice skating. That's kind of what the camera view looks like when it's going over your map. So you have some flexibility there. You can change some of the ways that you hover on top of the map. For example, I'll try circle just to show you what it looks like. And I could also change how fast it goes. So I can change how fast or how long the duration of this individual scene is. You'll also notice in the bottom right that I can adjust the time frame. So right now we're looking at data as of 2000 to 2013. I could, however, change this and say, well, I didn't really have very many failed banks in 2000, so let's start in 2005 and just look at all the data from 2005 going forward. So you have the ability to do that in here. You can just modify the date range. Okay? All right. So we've got our first scene created. Let's create one or two more. And I'm going to use some of the tools I've already shown you how to do this. So for example, we've got one scene created. I'm going to create a new scene by coming up to the very top ribbon and selecting Add Scene. Okay, so we now have two scenes listed out here. And what I want to do in the second scene, you can tell when you have each of these highlighted, the little green boxes around it, so kind of note, right now I have this top one selected. If I want to edit the second scene, I need to make sure I select that second scene on the bottom there. So I'm going to select that second scene. And I want to highlight some of those areas we've found that had extreme high failures in banks. So I'll do something like, we'll do a find location here. And I'm going to look for the location. Remember that was up in the top ribbon here. I'm going to look for Chicago because I found that Chicago had quite a few failed banks. So I'll type in Chicago, Illinois. You could just type Chicago by itself if you wanted. I see there's an extreme high level of failed banks here, so I will create this as a new scene. And I'll call this my Chicago scene. So I'll give it a name. Okay. You can also do neat things like this. I can add a text box in here. I can insert a text box. That's right up top here. I can insert a text box here to really show me the failed banks. I can also add the legend back in. Remember, we have a legend that's representing what this bar graph represents. I deleted that legend just because it was taking up too much of my screen. But I could always bring that legend back in by hitting that legend button here. Okay. You can also add in two-dimensional graphs. If I wanted to add in a two-dimensional graph, I just select that here. And it's going to base the data that we have right now and place a two-dimensional graph inside of our tour. So we can see all of our failed banks by cities here. Okay, just want to show you that. You can have some flexibility with how this is visualized here as well. You can change the different types of graphs layout as well. All right, so what I want to do, though, is I'm going to add in a text box here, and I'm going to have the text box say, what? I'll call this Chicago. And let's say, what happened in Chicago? Okay, and you can take some, you can change the font and all kinds of stuff like that a little bit in here as well. But I'm going to create this text box. I'm going to add it into my tour and put this next to here so that I can place little notes in here for my users. So whenever they go to launch my little movie or my tour I created, I can give them little notes on things that I found in the data ahead of time. All right, so that's another level of the tour that we created. Let's create one more scene here. I'll create a new scene. I'll come up here and hit Add Scene. I'm going to zoom out, and I'm going to kill this text box in our new scene. You'll notice we now have 3 scenes here, and in this new scene, what I'm going to do is we'll go to Atlanta. I think we saw Atlanta had quite a few failed banks as well. Atlanta, Georgia. All right, so that moved me over to Atlanta, Georgia, where I see we have another high level of failed banks. I'll call this my Atlanta scene here in the far right, and I'll leave that as is. All right, so let's take a look at what this does now. We have 3 separate scenes. I added in a text box. We start all the way at the beginning here with a full view of the map. Then we hover over to Chicago. Then we go over to Atlanta. Let's look at the full thing all together. The way we do that is by going up to the very top section here, and we tell it that we want to play a tour. Okay, so I'll tell it to play tour, and this is what our tour looks like. Remember, I set the setting here to go in a circle. We're actually seeing that that camera view is going in a circle. Now we're going over to our Chicago scene. Our text box pops up, and we're seeing the time here. Notice in the top left here, we see the time where our time is going by, and are seeing our increase in failed banks go across that time frame. So again, in the top left here, you can see the date scale go by. And that's how you create a very basic little tour. And using some of the functionality, we added some different scenes. We did some neat little things in there as well where we applied names to our scenes, applied names to our tours. Now what happens now is this is just saved inside of our workbook. It stays part of your workbook. If you want to share it with other people, right now the story for how you do this is you're going to create a video. That's the option inside the tour window here. And what happens if you select that option, you hit Create Video. It'll ask you what type of resolution, basically, or quality do you want to do. Do I want to have 1080p where I can put it on a big screen in front of hundreds of people on a big screen, or do I want it to be for a tablet or a PC, or just for a quick little mobile viewing? So I'm going to do a quick mobile one just because it's a little quicker. I could just as easily select any of these other options. It just takes a little longer to render, as you can imagine. But I'll hit Create, and I'm going to create a quick little mobile export. And I'm going to put this on my desktop so I can find it later. Okay, so I'll create this little video here. I'll show you what it looks like just so you can see the export capabilities of PowerMap. This is a new feature that was just added in the latest version. Now while that's going, I'm also going to go ahead and set up my next demo. I have another one that's kind of a short demonstration, and what the goal of this next short demonstration is to show you some of the geographical mapping that's been added. Okay, so I'm going to let this finish. See if it's almost done here. It's taking its time, but it's going a little faster now. While that's going, I can also show you one that I've already created. I was smart enough to make sure to go ahead and render a video ahead of time, but it's also creating a new one as we speak right now. Now the election example I'm going to show you next. Basically the next example I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a regional map and show you how the new functionality allows you to map out regions in PowerMap, which is a new capability. I'm going to show you the video for that one ahead of time while this one's rendering, just so you can kind of get an idea of what it looks like. So this is actually a 1080p video that I rendered earlier that shows an election map. And the election map here that we're visualizing is showing presidential elections from the 1800s to the 2008 election. And you can kind of see the blue and the red there representing the Democrat and Republican election parties. So then we were able to create that actually pretty quickly. You'll notice this one is starting to render. It's coming through. It's actually almost about finished, and it just did finish our video. And I can open up this video that we created on the fly here and see this one is more for a mobile device, but this is the one that we just created a moment ago. And it does the same thing that we saw inside of our tour, but it does it more in a video. It is a video format here. You'll notice it also does bring in our notes, or our text boxes that we added earlier inside of our tour. Okay? So basically it's the exact same thing as a tour, but it's saved as an MP4 file. Okay, very cool. All right, our last example I'm going to show you guys, and I want to make sure I save plenty of time for questions, so we'll probably have this as a quick demonstration. The last one I'm going to show you here, though, is on election data. So I actually have a Power Pivot workbook from one of our classes that we teach at Pragmatic Works, where we have all kinds of election data that we build a Power Pivot workbook on top of. Just kind of interesting data set. And what I want to show you in this example is how you can use PowerMap to visualize that data on a 3D map. Okay, so I'm going to go over to my Insert menu and I'll select PowerMap. You'll notice again that I've already created a map tour here once prior, but I'm going to walk you through doing this from scratch again. So I'll create a new tour. Okay, it's opening up on my other monitor. I'll bring it over here. All right, and you have the same idea. We start from scratch. We're starting from a basic map visualization here. And we want to come through and be able to visualize this kind of like CNN does, right? CNN or Fox News or MSNBC, whatever your flavor of political news is. I want to be able to visualize that election data on a map. Okay? So I want to start by coming over here to my geographical data. You can see I have states here. And I'll go ahead and select state. And you'll notice that part of that quick start process is it's trying to help me map state to a property inside PowerMap called state/province. So I'll select state/province and hit next. And you'll notice here on the actual map itself is it has mapped out all these different data points to a state inside the United States. Now the neat thing about what they've added in PowerMap in this latest version is the ability to not only map a dot like we're seeing here or just a column chart, we can also, instead of mapping a column, we can change this visualization to something else. You have the ability, this one's been here, you can do a bubble. This bubble chart's kind of been here all along. You could also do a heat map. Heat map, it expands when you have more and more data in a certain area, for example. Just to show you there quickly, I'll show you an example. So it shows you a heat map here, and it'll be the more values that you have in a certain area, the closer red it gets, that kind of thing. And then the final one I want to show you guys is a region. This is a new mapping type called region that allows you to actually place a geographical, geopolitical region, I guess, on a map and be able to assign data points to it or assign data to it. So I'm going to select here underneath type, I'll select region. And you'll see when I select region, I'm going to go ahead and kill this legend so it doesn't block the way here. You see when I select region that it highlights or selects and gives us regions for each of the states inside of our country, inside of the United States, I should say. Now, what I can do for this now is assign data to it. So right now we're just looking at shapes on the map, but what we can do is we can take these shapes on a map and convert this into values, or actually show values on the map. Now, the way I do this, again, this is election data, so I'm going to bring in something like the total popular votes, and I'm going to visualize that on top of the map. Now, you can see each of the different highlights of different shades of blue here represents whether you've had high popular vote or low popular vote. And based on what you can probably guess here, where you see it's dark blue, where California is usually a state with a lot of votes, because there's a lot of people there, it's my darker value here. Now, what I'd also like to do is be able to see which parties people were voting for. Were they voting for Democrat, Republican, or whatever? Maybe it's an independent. So to do that, I'll go down to my political parties here, and I'll select my political party name, and you'll see it now separates it out by political party. So it may make sense. It may make sense now more to bring in the legend that we had previously. So if I bring open the legend here, you'll see I have a legend for all of my political parties that have ever existed. Because keep in mind, what happens is we have data all the way back from the 1800s in this example. So there's all kinds of different political parties. There's obviously Democrat and Republicans, but there's the LA Taxpayers Party, there's the Libertarian Party, the Jobless Party. That sounds kind of sad. But there's a lot of different parties in here that we may not traditionally think about. The Free Soil Party, I like that one. Now, what I'd like to do, though, is I want to really emphasize on the Democrat and Republican parties because that's what's more known to us today. And the way I can do that and the way I can really kind of adjust this is by, rather than looking at these shades of colors, I can change these shades of colors in the bottom here, right underneath where our category is, or right above where our category is. I can change this from just being shades of color to actually have no shading and just show a full color for each of my categories. So this allows you to kind of adjust that shading value that we're looking at right now. Okay, so rather than looking at shading, we're now looking at a full color for each of our states. Okay, and that was a property right next to the category here. Now, I don't know about you, but this looks a lot like Christmas, and usually Democrats and Republicans are represented by blue and red, right? So the red might be okay, but the blue is not represented well here. And actually, it looks like the red, if I would make my best guess, California usually votes as a Democratic state. I would kind of guess here that the red's probably not assigned correctly either. So I have some nice flexibility here, and I showed this in the last example, but I have some flexibility where I can go underneath the settings and actually change this. And I can tell it specific values or specific colors that I want to assign to each of these values. So if I want the Democratic Party to be represented by blue, I can select that color or that category and then change the color to blue. And if I want the Republican Party to be represented by red, I can go find the Republican Party here in my list, change it to red, and then it's visualized more as a traditional CNN map here, for example. Now, I also want to be able to see this across time. Remember, I have elections all the way back from the 1800s, so I want to be able to visualize this across time. So I'll bring in a date value here, and we'll now see my map is now has the ability to animate. I have that play axis here on the bottom. So I can hit this play button, and you'll notice that in the very beginning that not all of our states actually had voting rights, or they weren't really states to begin with. But as time went on, we're looking in the 90s, 2000s here, as time went on, we have that data start to pop in, and our geographical map shows that. Now, right now, we looked at that, and that went extremely fast, right? That went pretty quick. So you actually have the flexibility to change how fast these things go. I can go down to the settings of my time axis I have on here on the bottom, and I can tell it that I want to slow it down, speed it up, do it just during a certain date range. I have a lot of flexibility here. So if I want my scene duration, for example, to be, let's say, 15 seconds versus 6 seconds that it started off with, I can change that to 15 seconds, run this again. You'll notice that it actually goes quite a bit slower now, a little easier to read pace. And I can see over time how my political map changes and where I actually have voting coming in for multiple states here. So that was 1940s. You saw a lot of blue. That was probably FDR. 1980s, a lot of red. That's probably Reagan. So you can see a lot of changes here in the political landscape over the years, all the way down to 2008. I don't have 2012 data in here, fortunately. So very interesting stuff that you can do in here. Hopefully you guys kind of find that interesting. Again, you can always go back and create tours. Remember we walked through creating multiple scenes. So I can look at a scene of my full map. I can add another scene of something like maybe the West Coast. So I want to see my votes across the West Coast. Keep in mind we didn't have elections in the West Coast until a certain time frame. So if I wanted to look at votes in the West Coast, I probably want to adjust my scale to look from the 1842 election going forward. Or at least maybe 1860s. And I can do that here. I can adjust my time scale in the far right here. I can say I want this to really be showing as of the 1860s rather than the 1820s. And I can go over to the 1860s here and be able to start in the 1860s rather than the early 1800s. So take a look at this kind of tour that we've done now. Remember that the political map didn't really have a lot of elections at all and the West Coast in the 1800s. But the way that we've designed this one, we're going to look at a full map, and then when we zoom in on another scene, which you'll see here, it'll zoom in on the secondary scene here in just a moment, when we go into our second scene, you'll notice that it starts with data. So you'll see here just in a moment where it's going to zoom in to the West Coast, and when we go to that West Coast view, we're going to start with few maps or few states, but it's going to suddenly jump into a bunch of states very quickly. And that's because we changed our date range. We changed our date range to just show that time scale, that time frame that we really cared about there. Okay? All right, guys. Well, we could play around and show more examples. I actually do have one more example, but I want to save some time for questions as well, at least the last 10 minutes or so here. So Melissa, if you want, let's transition to that. I will bring up my slide deck here again.
All right. Very exciting. I can't wait to make a tour of my own.
Yeah, it's really cool. So the new stuff is fantastic. I love it.
Yeah. So we have one question in the queue. Is it integrated with SharePoint?
Okay. Yeah, I have gotten that question a lot. Unfortunately, as of this time, it's not. So really the way that the Microsoft story as far as sharing this with others is to turn it into that video, turn it into that MP4 file, and then you share that video file however you need with whoever you want. But not into SharePoint yet.
And probably not into reporting services either, right?
That's right. Yeah, you're
that
right
was
about
another
that.
That was another question. One of my questions is when you prepare the video, can you add audio at that time?
Somebody asked me that as well. I've heard that's coming. I actually watched a short little session about what's coming, and I've heard that's going to be capable or eventually possible, but right now it's not.
Okay. Okay, so that's cool. So they're in the midst of adding more things. Is there any place where they have the possible new things coming, or places where we can contribute to the features?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's a great point. I actually follow pretty closely with some of the product team through social media, and I kind of send them feedback that way. I'm sure there's probably like some Connect sites that you can use for that. But I actually kind of, luckily, because all this stuff is very new, they're pretty good with feedback. So I've actually, I know some of the folks on the Power Query team I'll kind of follow. I know, gosh, what's his name? Aaron is one of them, or Efren is one of them, I believe. But yeah, I kind of follow them through social media and give them kind of feedback that way. But there are some Connect sites that you can use as well for that.
Okay, I'll have to look for those and try to get those published out to the group as well.
Yeah, I unfortunately don't know off the top of my head, but
sure.
I'm sure there are some ways.
All right. Want to ask folks out there if you have any more questions, please post them out here.
Yeah, and I'll put this back up on the screen, so if you guys need to reach me afterwards, you're welcome to do that way. And I believe you normally say this anyways, Melissa, but you have the recording out a couple hours after, like 3 or 4 hours after the sessions?
Right. I will have it out soon. It usually follows the same URL schema, but I'll post it on Twitter as soon as I have it out there under Pass BA VC.
Great. Great.
Awesome. I'm excited to see No more questions, but I'm excited to see any additional things at the past summit. So the past summit's always a
Yeah.
good place to go for possible future announcements. So I'm hoping we might see more there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. This usually they'll get something will be announced, whether it's Power BI feature or a SQL Server in general. You usually will get something, some
Something
little
there.
tidbit.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. As always, everybody who speaks for this chapter does it free of charge. They volunteer their time, so we really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a good day.
All right, you too. Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming.